Ancient Earth History, Part 3, by guest author January 12, 2022. Guest article by Robert Dawson. Ancient records reveal that our own ancestors came to Earth as refugees from other galaxies and solar systems.
On September 29, 2017, former NASA Apollo astronaut Al Worden appeared on the television talk show Good Morning Britain. In the interview, Al Worden, the Apollo 15 astronaut who flew around the moon 75 times over 6 days, was asked if he believed aliens were real. His salient reply was that not only are aliens real, but they came to Earth in the distant past and created our civilization, and furthermore, if we wanted to look for evidence, all we had to do was look at ancient records.
We are the aliens, but we just think they are somebody else. But we are the ones who came from somewhere else because somebody else had to survive, and they got into spacecraft. Then they came here and landed, and they started civilization here. And if you don't believe me, go get books on ancient Sumerians and see what they had to say. They'll tell you right up front, Worden stated in the interview.
Worden made an astute observation that for the most part was lost on his interviewers, namely that our own ancient ancestors came to Earth from other star systems as refugees. Going much further back in time and with more complete information than the Sumerian texts, the contact notes of Billy Meyer with the Plejarans contain dramatic accounts of Earth-foreign colonizers fleeing intergalactic wars in the Lyran and Vegan star systems. And further back in time still, the colonization of Mars by genetically manipulated refugees from the Sirian star system who would later come to Earth. Ancient Sumerian clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform writing on display at the British Museum, Oxford, England. Most of the recovered writings have yet to be translated. A former NASA Apollo astronaut Al Worden on the television show Good Morning Britain. Here is a link to the entire interview. https://www. YouTube. Comwatch V=YP05NHB2WLU. The photograph of the Sumerian king list in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford, which lists the kings who ruled over Earth, or more specifically over ancient Sumer, for a total of 241,200 years since the extraterrestrials descended from heaven. Written in cuneiform, the reign of each king spans thousands of years, baffling historians since normal human life today is barely 100. This phenomenon is explained within the Meyer contact notes that the limited lifespans of Earth humans is largely a result of genetic engineering that occurred on planets within the Sirius star systems many, many eons ago. This aging gene manipulation, as it is referred to in the notes, was meant to be a controlling mechanism originally initiated by a fearful elite class long, long ago upon other humans, and became the cause of the first exodus of Earth foreigners to arrive into our solar system, seeking a new home as refugees. They colonized first on Mars and Melona, and eventually on Earth where the gene was introduced. It is explained further in the contact notes that Melona, also known as Phaeton, was once a habitable planet in our Sol system before exploding as a consequence of war, and the debris field now forms the asteroid belt. And the Sumerian king list begins.
After kingship had descended from heaven, Eridu became the seat of kingship. In Eridu, Alulim reigned 28,800 years as king. Alalgar reigned 36,000 years. Snip 8 kings reigned 241,200 years. The flood then swept over the land. After the flood had swept over the land and kingship had descended from heaven a second time, Kish became the seat of kingship. Total 23 kings reigned 24,510 years, 3 months, 3 days. Kish was defeated in battle, and its kingship was carried off to Eanna. In Eanna, Meskiagashur, the son of Utu, who is depicted in photograph below, reigned both as En and king 324 years. Meskiagashar entered the sea and ascended the mountains. Snip-Dumuzi, the fisherman whose city was Kua, reigned 100 years. Gilgamesh, whose father was a nomad, reigned 126 years. Urnungal, the son of Gilgamesh, reigned 30 years.
Translation source: The Sumerians, Their History, Culture, and Character by Samuel Kramer.
The Ziggurat of Eridu. Eridu was the center of kingship after the Earth foreigners arrived on Earth descended from heaven, as stated in the Sumerian king list. The ancient city of Uruk, or Ur, was a few kilometers away. And the man depicted sitting in a throne seat and holding a ring and rod in his hand is Utu, also known as Shamash, the sun god, and was a patron of Gilgamesh. According to the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utu helps Gilgamesh defeat the ogre Humbaba. The Sumerian texts say that Utu would ride through the heavens in his sun chariot and see all things that happened in the day. He is shown in this relief carving dispensing justice, and was known as a wise judge and lawgiver. The disk sitting on the table is the sun symbol, which is comprised of two overlapping crosses. A similar symbol became associated with another earth foreigner mistaken as a god, Quetzalcoatl. The Sumerian texts also state that Utu was tall in stature, a giant, and this carving is probably depicting his relative height proportion correctly in relation to the earth humans. The photograph of the ziggurat at Eridu, also known as the Ziggurat of Ur, as it stands today after being partially restored since it was excavated in the 1930s. Iraq's transport minister, Kazem Finjan, made international news in 2016 when he announced in a press conference, "The first airport that was established on planet Earth was in this place," referring to Kar, the area of the Sumerian cities of Eridu and Ur, and the Ziggurat. He referenced the research work of Sumerian expert and professor Samuel Kramer, who wrote From the Tablets of Sumer in 1956.
Excerpt from Contact Report 695.
Well, Sfaoth explained to me then that in pre-biblical times, more than 5,000 years ago, the whole huge area down there in the south of Iraq, where the city of Basra is also situated on the river Shat al-Arab, which flows into the Persian Gulf about 100 kilometers away, all the way down to Dilmun, or to the east coast of today's Bahrain, was ruled by the people of the Blackheads, who called themselves Sagiganot, Sumerians, because of their black hair ornaments.
The examples of the black hair ornaments worn by ancient Sumerians, Sagiga. The style was later adopted by certain Egyptian nobility. The stone carving of Gilgamesh, who, according to the contact notes, was an extraterrestrial from a race whose original lifespan was about 120,000 years. He could not return to his home planet because it was destroyed very suddenly, discussed in Contact Report 222, and so became a refugee himself. He was large in physical stature by Earth measure, a giant, and according to Contact Report 69, Gilgamesh was about 7.50 meters tall. Thus, his size proportion to the lion he is holding with his left arm is probably accurately portrayed. Gilgamesh, originally Bilgam Sumerian, translates roughly as, "The ancestor is a young man." Source: Hayes, J.L. Manual of Sumerian Grammar and Texts. The Epic of Gilgamesh was rediscovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal in 1849. After being translated in the early 1870s, it caused widespread controversy due to similarities between portions of it and the Hebrew Bible. Most classical historians agree the Epic of Gilgamesh exerted substantial influence on the Iliad and the Odyssey, two epic poems written in ancient Greek during the 8th century BC. The black hair ornament was made fashionable again by King Louis IV, the Sun King of France, who had several portraits made wearing different styles during the Renaissance period, and the style became fashionable with the ruling elite. This picture is of a hair ornament still used today by certain members of the English court system but in a ceremonial role. A stone wall relief located at Persepolis in today's Iran, showing another example of the black hair ornament. A map showing the extent of the ancient Sumerian civilization in both the yellow and orange areas.
Excerpt from Contact Report 695.
The whole large area was an unusually fertile and completely green area, with a diverse animal and plant world, so to speak a huge paradisiacal natural kingdom with fields, meadows, and forests. Dilmun, today's Bahrain, was also a large city in pre-biblical times and an important trading center, for its strategically favorable location on the sea trade route between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley was ideal and also promoted the prosperity of the entire country, from which many food products were obtained and shipped. The then flourishing and green region was also blessed with a large supply of fresh water from artesian springs, which, however, have dried up today.
And this carved stone relief depicting a bearded man in a flying object is Ahura Mazda. He was considered to be a god, and was also known as the uncreated supreme creator deity. This design became an iconic symbol, known as Fravashi or Faravahar, and copied almost unchanged over centuries of time. It later became adopted as a symbol for Zoroastrianism, and is still used by them today. According to the sacred texts in the Avesta, which is part of Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda appeared to his prophet Yima and instructed that an underground city to be built to protect civilization from the coming evil winter. He was instructed to build an excellent domain under the earth, lit by its own light, and take in it the best individuals from each species to preserve their seed. There they should dwell through the winter's destruction, then emerge and repopulate the earth. This is a partial sketch of that underground city showing the many levels located at Derinkuya, and was reused multiple times over the centuries by different people seeking refuge. Source: Encyclopedia Britannica. This is a photograph of the underground city at Derinkuya, parts of which is still accessible today and open to tourism. The contact notes explain that there were several worldwide type cataclysms in Earth's ancient past which decimated global population and wiped out civilizations. An extraterrestrial named Zebulon maintained contact with an Earthman named Noachadnosser and explained to him the approaching danger of a comet and advised him to build the Ark, which he then did in collaboration with his family and hence survived the immense flood, along with his family and with many domestic and land animals. This is discussed in Contact Reports 150 and 248. At the age of 30, Zoroaster, also known as Zarathustra, saw a shining being on a riverbank while attending a spring festival. This being, called Vohumana, taught him about Ahura Mazda and 5 other radiant figures. Zoroaster was taught about the duality nature of the universe and decided to spend his life teaching people to seek truth. His teachings would form the basis of Zoroastrianism. Zoroaster claimed that Ahura Mazda was not an omnipotent god, but used the aid of humans in the cosmic struggle against attempts to attract humans away from the path of truth. Source: The Human Record, Sources of Global History, to 1700, Andrea, Alfred, James H. Overfield, 2000. According to Billy Meyer, the Book of Truth is called the OM. A portion of the book is devoted to clarifications about how God is not creation, and how the gods were people who came from the stars and misrepresented themselves as creators. There are references in OM about the repeated corruption of the teachings over the millennia and the role of the prophets who have come time and time again to correct this situation. Excerpts from the OM. Canon 20, 94. The human races and peoples of earth were provided prophets from ancient days, and for this reason were sent to earth. Enoch, Henoch, and Elijah, Elijah, Isaiah, Jesaja, Jeremiah, Jeremja, Emmanuel, and Muhammad in direct succession and with ensuing rebirth, next to Johannes and Elijah and Job and all hosts of other upstanding and righteous ones, as they also were Buddha, Zoroaster, and Babachi and others. Canon 20, 95. They were all selected and led and sent partly through the Ishwish, and partly through themselves and in knowledge and ability as prophets or spirit leaders to the humankind and peoples of the earth. Yet all were slandered and persecuted, and their teachings and their words of truth were falsified in lack of understanding or hate, and so wrongly leading and false religions and sects have come into being. The acronym OM is derived from the two words Omphalan Murado and became the traditional form. The ancient Lyrians referred to their writings about the truth, the Book of Truth, also as the Om, Omphalan Murado, life's navel or the navel of life. The text, entitled Om, incorporates all creational teachings, that is to say, the book holds all teachings of wisdom and life as a written record. Voice of the Aquarian Age, number 50, OM. A false teaching can begin to emerge in numerous ways, most often the result of human ignorance. In the case of the Anunnaki, which are mentioned in a few of the Sumerian texts, noted Sumerian scholar Samuel Kramer writes in his book, The Sumerian Their History, Culture and Character, that none of the Sumerian gods, that is to say, Enlil, Enki, Eridu, etc., are identified as being Anunnaki themselves, but rather, the Anunnaki is merely a reference to a few descendants from those that came from the heavens. They had only minor roles in the Sumerian pantheon, yet several popular books of today claim that the Anunnaki originated from the planet Nibiru, among many other distortions. The contact notes clarify this.
Excerpt from Contact Report 467.
What do you call this comet or planet? And is it possible that it is the one the Sumerians called Nibiru? With regard to the Anunnaki, which are said to have lived on it, and to have been helpful to the humans of the earth, Quetzal once said that this was nonsense, and that the whole thing was based only on mythological facts and on faith. He already said that Nibiru is not a planet, but an unusually large comet, with an actual orbital period of 3,600 years around, and in the Sol system. The Anunnaki people of Nibiru is only a mythological imagination, a people that never existed, because the dark comet is not able to carry human life.
And what Quetzal explained in this regard is absolutely true. The giant comet or giant planet of several times the size of the Earth is in fact what the ancient Sumerians called Nibiru, the ancient Egyptians' destroyers and the Celtic ancestors' bringer of terror. We call him Hamarank Natal, which means dark giant.
And these are multiple statuette carvings created by ancient Sumerians depicting themselves with whitish skin and large, roundish blue eyes. This is a mummy of a woman recovered at the burial site of the ancient Wari people in Peru at Huacapuclana near Lima, located completely on the opposite side of the planet from the Sumerians. The face mask on the mummy depicts features very similar to those in the statuette images at the left, most notably the large roundish eyes painted blue. The Wari people held a tight relationship with the people of Tiwanaku or Tiahuanaco, which was founded by the extraterrestrial Viracocha, as discussed in Contact Report 69. The two largest figures in the development of ancient Mexican culture were extraterrestrials, or Earth foreigners, as they are often referred to. They were Huitzilopochtli and Quetzalcoatl. Billy has said in an answer to a question that the Plejarans had actually been in direct contact with Quetzalcoatl at that time.
Excerpt from Contact Report 055.
The Quetzalcoatl had been, in Earth terms, a very high officer or a high supervisor of an extraterrestrial group, which was active in the region you today call Egypt. But he was very knowledgeable and wise, and thus was often assigned special missions, of which one brought him to South America, where he became venerated as a god by the Aztecs. Since he owned a small ship, this impression of the Aztec people was strengthened, but this was not his intention. When he first met together with another commissioner, a certain Huitzilopochtli, he changed his conduct. Huitzilopochtli was one of the leading Giza intelligences, and he exercised a bloody sacrifice-based rulership over the Aztecs. He was insatiable in this respect and demanded human blood as sacrifice, while Quetzalcoatl was against such. Thus, an evil enmity rose between them, and each of them sought to gain leadership over the peoples. By wicked deceit and deceptive machinations, Huitzilopochtli succeeded in expelling Quetzalcoatl, in consequence of which he fled and returned to Egypt.
And this is a close-up of a mural illustrating the Book of Gates in the tomb of Pharaoh Seti I. The subject of the mural is to portray all the types of people at that time which made up Egyptian society. Egyptians, Semites, Nubians, and the type in this picture identified as a Libyan. He appears to be wearing a black hair ornament, similar to the Sumerians. A larger portion of this mural can be seen in part 2 of this series. Cover art for the Book of Quetzalcoatl by Richard W. Kimball. Richard Kimball spent years studying the oral histories of the native peoples in Mesoamerica that were influenced by Quetzalcoatl. This illustration is based on those first-hand accounts and probably best represents what Quetzalcoatl actually looked like. It contains many similarities to the depiction of the Libyan to the left shown in the Egyptian mural, that is to say, a feathered headdress, a beard, similar style cut of hair on the head, a colorful robe, and both are depicting a cross. The Libyan has a cross tattoo on his left upper arm, and Quetzalcoatl is holding a shield with a cross on it with his left hand. The cross on the shield has a resemblance to the sun symbol, depicted in the Sumerian stone tablet shown previously. These crosses are not related to Christianity. In his right hand, Quetzalcoatl is holding the serpent, Xiuhcoatl, which by its historical description is a laser-type weapon. Meyer, Plejaren Contact Report. 55 states that there was conflict between the two extraterrestrial groups, Huitzilopochtli of the Giza intelligences and Quetzalcoatl of a benevolent group, particularly with regards to their respective agendas in interacting with the Earthlings. This ancient Egyptian mural is showing two Libyans being hand-bound with a connecting tether and led away by a long skull, a possible example of that conflict. The person in the middle is depicted with blue eyes. The Book of Quetzalcoatl contains stories of how the priests of the cult of Huitzilopochtli would make up and spread false rumors about Quetzalcoatl, such as one claiming that he got drunk and impregnated his sister, thus ruining his reputation in such a way that he had to leave. As explained in Contact Report 55, he eventually returned to Egypt altogether. And a painting of Hernando Cortés and Montezuma II Moctezuma.
An excerpt from the Book of Quetzalcoatl.
And when Hernando Cortés and his mercenaries splashed ashore on a Mexican beach in 1519, people were watching. To the brightly feathered Mesoamericans watching from concealment, the year was known as Si-Acatl. Surely, they thought, the unfolding spectacle on the beach was the promised return of their god, Quetzalcoatl. The fantastic winged canoes, the gleaming metal clothing, the strangely feathered helmets, and the great unknown beasts were certainly the possessions of gods. When odd black-robed priests, each carrying a cross similar to the ancient Indian symbol of the four directions and the personal emblem of Quetzalcoatl, came ashore to perform elaborate ceremonies in the sand, the Mesoamerican watchers were convinced the god Quetzalcoatl had returned. Old Mexican codices said Quetzalcoatl would return from the east in the year of his birth, Se-Acatl. The time had arrived. Quickly, they summoned fleet-footed runners to carry urgent messages to the city of Tenochtitlan. The Emperor Moctezuma must know of the fabled god's return. The appearance of Cortez, of course, was not the predicted return of Quetzalcoatl. The Mesoamericans eventually realized their mistake, but it was too late. The conquest of Mexico and the far-flung Aztec Empire had already begun.
A drawing of Huitzilopochtli, which appears in the Codex Telleriano-Remensis. To the Aztec, Huitzilopochtli wore a blue-green hummingbird helmet and was draped in pure white heron feathers. He carried a smoking mirror, an obsidian mirror, a shield, darts, and the serpent Xiucotl that carried with it the fury and might of the sun. Excerpt from the book Huitzilopochtli, The History of the Aztec God of War and Human Sacrifice, by Ernesto Nervado and Charles River editors. The photograph of the Quetzal bird native to the Americas. The manuscript Codex Mendoza of the Aztec period lists feathers among the items that the Aztecs collected as tribute from conquered tribes, and in some instances, Quetzal feathers are specified. For example, 800 bundles of long, rich green feathers called Quetzali was one entry in the Codex. The trade and tribute of feathers must have been an important activity virtually everywhere in the high civilizations of the Americas. Sculpture and painting show that not only headdresses of kings but also their capes, garments, fans, and banners could be embellished with feathers, usually tied into cloth. Even shields and spears of important warriors were feathered. Today, the Guatemalan currency is called the Quetzal, and the bird appears on the national flag. Quetzal means precious or sacred. The design of the Mexican seal and national flag is based on the story recorded in multiple ancient codices of the promise made by Huitzilopochtli, the extraterrestrial of the Giza intelligences, to the ancestors of modern-day Mexico. These ancient Mesoamerican documents say that the Aztec people originated from the city of Aztlan, the description of which corresponds to ancient descriptions of Atlantis. For example, Plato describes Atlantis as a city built over a lake, just as Aztlan was said to be. Some of the stories recorded in the codices describe the journey of their ancestors, from Aztlan to their new homeland at Tenochtitlan, as being under the guidance and direction of Huitzilopochtli for the whole pilgrimage duration. He told the ancestral refugees that they would receive a sign that would designate the correct location to build their new Aztlan. That sign would be an eagle, holding a serpent in its talon and perched on top of a prickly pear cactus. The cactus is shown in the flag as situated on a rock that rises above a lake. Allegedly, that sign was indeed seen near the shore of Lake Texcoco and was thus determined the correct site to rebuild their new homeland in the likeness of their old one, in what would be Tenochtitlan. A depiction of Aztlan, the homeland of the ancestors of the Aztec people, surrounded by water as it appears on the second leaf of the Auburn Codex. A computer-generated 3D model of what Tenochtitlan looked like using all available archaeological and historical evidence, from building remains to old drawings and maps of the city's plan. It is recorded in ancient documents that Aztlan was the model for the rebuilding of their new homeland. When we saw so many cities and villages built in the water and other great towns on dry land, we were amazed and said that it was like the enchantments, on account of the great towers and quays and buildings rising from the water, and all built of masonry. And some of our soldiers even asked whether the things that we saw were not a dream. I do not know how to describe it, seeing things as we did that had never been heard of or seen before, not even dreamed about. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, The Conquest of New Spain. An artist rendering of Atlantis based on the written descriptions of Plato in Timaeus and Critias. Further discussion of Atlantis and the new information provided about it by the Plejarans will appear in the future. And this is a picture of the first image which appears in the Boturini Codex, which shows Aztlan Atlantis, to the left, surrounded by water, and according to the text, Huitzilopochtli is shown across the water on land with only his head appearing, which is interpreted by many to mean that he is in an underground cave. The outer triangular shape is traditionally interpreted as a hill or mound. However, with historical information now provided by the Plejarans, that Huitzilopochtli was part of an extraterrestrial group known as the Giza Intelligences, who had a base under the Giza Plateau, this could also be representing a pyramid. He appears to be communicating to them remotely by putting out thought impulses. This first scene shows the beginning of the Exodus, as depicted by the man in the boat, at the beckoning of Huitzilopochtli. The footprints are figurative representation to show movement along the migration path, and the length of time is indicated alongside of it within the rectangular box. The time span covered in the narrative is believed to be about 200 years. Several accounts of the Exodus say that the people went underground for a period first and lived in a system of caves at Chikamaztok, meaning the place of the 7 caves. When it was safe, they came up on ground again and journeyed to their new Aztlan, guided by Huitzilopochtli. Source: Aztlan, The History and Mystery of the Aztecs' Ancestral Home, Charles Rivers Editors. Multiple accounts of Aztlan say it was abandoned as a result of a conflict, and the origin stories of several other Mesoamerican groups also claim that they were forced to abandon their respective homelands due to conflicts. Source: Michel Graulich, Arqueologia Mexicana. This is a depiction of Huitzilopochtli in a very human form which appears in the Codex Telleriano Remensis. Huitzilopochtli was also known by Vichipuchitl. This drawing is closer to what he actually may have looked like than in the artistically stylized versions. His hair is depicted with a red color and his facial features have more of a European look. In his right hand, he is holding a laser-type weapon that is described as having the appearance of lighting when it was used. Source: Huitzilopochtli, The History of the Aztec God of War and Human Sacrifice, by Ernesto Nervado and Charles River Editors. An example of a redhead represented in ancient Egyptian art. The following poem is translated from the ancient native language of the Aztec, Nahuatl, and offers a detailed description of Huitzilopochtli. It is unique among the ancient writings in that it makes no attempt to deify him in reverence. In fact, it portrays him as a flawed human and in an identical manner that he is portrayed by the Plejarans in Contact Report 55.
Huitzilopochtli, only a subject, only a mortal was. A magician, a terror, a stirrer of strife, a deceiver, a maker of war, an arranger of battles, a lord of battles, and of him it was said that he hurled his flaming serpent, his fire stick, which means war, blood and burning, and when his festival was celebrated, captives were slain, and thus he was arrayed, with head, dress of green feathers, holding his serpent torch, girded with a belt, bracelets upon his arms, wearing turquoises, as a master of messengers.
And from the book, Rig Veda Americanus, Sacred Songs of the Ancient Mexican, by Daniel Brinton, 1890. In the lyrics above, we see how an ancient writer attempts to describe an advanced technology, such as a laser weapon, that is outside of their understanding, by using 3 different descriptions: flaming serpent, fire stick, and serpent torch. Yet another of the white gods that played a central role in the ancient history of the Americas is the extraterrestrial Viracocha, about whom the Plejarans have this to say.
Excerpt from Contact Report 69.
The events of earlier times on this island, Easter Island, are in direct connection with the country, which you still call Tiahuanaco today, as it was called already at earliest time, in spite of past repeated changes. Easter Island and Tiahuanaco are more than 5,000 kilometers apart, and yet they are directly related to each other. However, the history of the connection goes back to very early times and ended only 2,548 years ago, calculated back from today, 1976 equals 572 before Emmanuel. As I once explained to you, the last decisive settlement of the Earth by extraterrestrial intelligences took place about 13,500 Earth years ago. As you know, several of the immigrant horde became renegades, including a man in the rank of a half-Jishwish called Viracocha, who was already very old and extremely power-hungry. His name is still handed down on the Earth today, but with a small change, because for a long time now he has only been called Viracocha, and also as Jishwish, pronounced Ishwish, although he was only in half the rank of such a person. Under his patronage and his cruel leadership, the highlands of Tiahuanaco at an altitude of about 4,000 meters were conquered, as was the Delta Island, which you call Easter Island.
This is the Gate of the Sun at the ancient site of Tiahuanaco, and is carved from a single massive block of andesite stone. Viracocha is depicted at the top center holding a laser-type weapon in each hand, similar to one shown being held by the extraterrestrial Huitzilopochtli, previously in this article. He is depicted with large, round, orbital eyes. Blocks of stone that weigh up to 150 tons with clean 90-degree edges ready for construction are littered throughout the site. Then enlargement photo with better lighting brings out the rich detail and intricate design at the top center of the Gate of the Sun at Tiahuanaco. Careful examination shows multiple motifs repeated with amazing precision and symmetry, all within the same block of stone, that could only be accomplished with advanced technological abilities. Viracocha was worshipped as god of the sun and of storms, and was said to wear the sun for a crown and hold thunderbolts in his hands. The Plejarians say in the contact notes that Viracocha was a half-Jishwish, which means he would have been knowledgeable of the Book of Life, also called Om. This would explain why many of the statues found on Easter Island have the acronym OM engraved on their backs. This is a photograph of a recently excavated statue that had previously been covered up with only the head appearing above ground. A photograph showing the partially excavated pyramid located at the ruins of the ancient Tiahuanaco citadel in western Bolivia. Drone flights over the complex to gather imagery have shown that the site encompasses at least 650 hectares, 1,675 acres, and the Tiahuanaco Archaeological Research Center had discovered this previously underground pyramid at the site using ground-penetrating radar. At its height, the Tiwanaku realm covered 600,000 square kilometers, 231,000 square miles, and held a tight relationship with the Wari people of the northern city of Huari. The Wari civilizations contain types of architecture similar to what's found in Tiwanaku. The relationship between the two civilizations is presumed to be trade-based or military-based. A photograph of a mummy from a Wari burial site shown previously has a burial mask with facial features similar to those depicted in Sumerian statuettes. And 5 photographs of the stone found at Pumapunku, just a few kilometers away from Tiahuanaco, with which it is very connected. Ancient legend has it that Tiahuanaco was built as a religious site to celebrate the arrival of sky gods at Pumapunku. Together, these archaeological sites stand out as unequaled, in the details, in precision, and design. Recent studies at Tiahuanaco has led scientists to believe that the structures were positioned in such a way that they had to be based on an astronomical principle called the obliquity of the ecliptic, which is the angle between the plane of the ecliptic, or the plane of the Earth's orbit, and the plane of the Earth's equator, the tilt of the Earth. Pumapunku had a stone aqueduct system many centuries before the ancient Romans. This is a picture of a public water feature. And Tiahuanaco had a well-developed infrastructure such as an underground drainage system. And one of the most prominent features at Tiahuanaco is this statue located at the center of the sunken temple, believed to be a depiction of Viracocha. But is it? He is shown as having a beard and some features similar to ancient Sumeria, such as large, round, orbital eyes. But according to Simyase, Viracocha looked like the sculptures found on Easter Island. And she further states in Contact Report 69 that Tiahuanaco was already established by previous extraterrestrials and their offspring, Samjas. He and his followers, escaped Lyrans like many others, who came to the Earth, were of gigantic physique, by earthly measure about 11 meters tall. They were the ones who taught the dwarfish, normal-growing inhabitants of Tiahuanaco and Easter Island, who were procreations between earthlings and previously immigrated intelligences from the vastness of the universe, in many things, providing them with their own highly developed technology and teaching them how to operate the devices and machines. The wall in the foreground of this picture is part of a rectangular enclosure at Tiahuanaco, known as the Calasasaya, and is constructed of alternating tall stone columns and smaller rectangular blocks. During excavations in the 60s, a temple was unearthed there with several odd features on the walls. The most interesting ones are the carvings of several faces, which, according to some researchers, depict all of the races of mankind ranging from heads with elongated skulls, faces that have thick lips, turbans, and many other examples of different human species. This is a close-up picture of the head carvings in the wall at Tiahuanaco. A mummy discovered at a pre-Inca archaeological site in Peru is of a man with red hair and beard. The conquistador, Pedro Pizarro, reported in his account of the Great Spanish Invasion of South America in the 1500s that while the masses of Andes Indians were small and dark, the members of the ruling Inca family were tall and had whiter skins than the Spaniards themselves. He mentions in particular certain individuals in present-day Peru at the time of the writing, who were white and had red hair. Source: AKU, The Secret of Easter Island by Thor Heyerdahl, page 351.
Pizarro asked who the white-skinned redheads were. The Inca Indians replied that they were the last descendants of the Viracochas. The Viracochas, they said, were a divine race of white men with beards. They were so like the Spanish that the Europeans were called Viracochas the moment they came to the Inca Empire. The Incas thought they were the Viracochas who had come sailing back across the Pacific.
I Heyerdahl Ibid. Page 253.
When the Spaniards came to Lake Titicaca up in the Andes, they found the mightiest ruins in all South America, Tiahuanaco. They saw a hill reshaped by man into a stepped pyramid, classical masonry of enormous blocks, beautifully dressed and fitted together, and numerous large statues in human form. They asked the Indians to tell them who had left these enormous ruins. The well-known chronicler, Cieza de Leon, was told in reply that these things had been made long before the Incas came to power. They were made by white and bearded men like the Spaniards themselves. The white men had finally abandoned their statues and gone with the leader, Contichi Viracocha, first up to Cuzco and then down to the Pacific. They were given the Inca name of Viracocha, or sea foam, because they were white-skinned and vanished like foam over the sea.
A Heyerdahl Ibid. Page 253.
So we see from these excerpts of Heyerdahl's book that historically the word Viracocha or Viracocha was also used in a broader sense and applied to all white men, who in this case also happened to be foreigners. This face carving in the cliffs of the Pincoluna mountain above Ollantaytambo, Peru, is said to be that of the creator god. Modern tour guide books available in the local area have identified it as Viracocha. However, none of the early Spanish historians have recorded that the local people ever claimed that this creator god was Viracocha. Nor does the claim appear anywhere else on record. This is a sketch of the same rock carving which brings out more of the details. A crown of sort is depicted on his head enclosing a small shrine that people can walk to and leave flowers. This is a sketch of the extraterrestrial Jehovah drawn by Sim Ya-se, one of the Plejarians' contacts to Billy Meyer. According to the contact information, Jehovah presented himself to Earthlings as the creator god and fostered a religious-like following. This sketch image of Jehovah bears a much stronger resemblance to the stone carving than Viracocha, particularly with regards to the eyes. Viracocha most likely looked like one of the sculpted heads found on Easter Island shown in this picture. According to Contact Report 69, they were built under the direction of Viracocha and his fellow refugees in their own image. They were giants about 11 meters tall, had unusually low forehead shapes, extremely deep eyes, very sharp narrow lips with pinched mouth parts, and their noses were unusually sharp, straight and long. Quote from Interview with Billy, 1998.
The term God has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the creation of the world or the universe. Stars, galaxies, and the like, for the expression God has existed in the vastness of the universe for billions of years, from ancient times to the present, and it represents nothing more than the title of a person. Initially, this title was Ishwish, which means God, when translated into our languages. But Ishwish, respectively God, is nothing more than another term for King of Wisdom. It is a purely human title assigned to humans who were particularly knowledgeable, wise, and who possessed great mastery in everything. This term's significance, however, was distorted and falsified by humans on Earth, particularly by the early religions, and those experienced in profiting from using the word. The result was that God, as a king of wisdom, was removed, and the people turned him into a creator god who, allegedly, had created the Earth, the sun, and outer space. Numerous individuals, such as Jehovah and many others, even claimed of themselves to be creator gods, with the consequence that they were also revered and worshipped.
Article by Robert Dawson.